History is not written by the victors. It is edited by the survivors. Welcome to Obscura Imperium, where buried truths resurface and erased names return from the shadows. Most intelligence agencies proudly display their origin stories, heroic beginnings, desperate wars, necessary evils. But buried beneath those polished narratives lies a pattern that historians struggle to explain, a shared methodology, a familiar logic, different flags, different languages, yet the same fingerprints. According to fragmented records recovered decades later, those fingerprints may belong to a single erased bloodline, the Banu Netzach. Their name appears nowhere in official archives, no plaques, no citations, no memorials, and yet traces of their thinking surface repeatedly in the early structures of three major intelligence agencies, not as founders, not as leaders, but as architects, designers who never signed their work. The story begins in Eastern Europe during the collapse of civilization itself. Avraham Netzach, the man who studied darkness. In 1942, while most intellectuals were running from the Nazis, Avraham was studying them. A polyglot scholar from Vilnius, Avraham understood something few others did. Brutality had a system. Fear had patterns. Power moved through belief before it moved through weapons. While hiding under false identities, he documented how the Nazi intelligence machine functioned, not just logistically, but psychologically. How false narratives created obedience, how fear could be redirected, how interrogations broke not bodies, but identities. These observations were never published. Instead, he compiled them into a private manuscript known only through references, the Labyrinth Doctrine. It outlined principles that would later become standard intelligence tradecraft, false flags not as lies, but emotional traps, interrogation resistance through identity fragmentation, deniable assets with no ideological loyalty. By 1944, word of Avraham's ideas reached two emerging intelligence networks, the American OSS and the Jewish paramilitary underground that would later evolve into Mossad. Both wanted him. Avraham worked for neither, at least not officially. He sold knowledge, not allegiance. Survival, not patriotism, was his ideology. Daniela's note, recovered fragment. My grandfather believed nations were temporary, methods were eternal. The inheritance no one wanted. Avraham did not live to see the world he helped shape, but his ideas did. He passed his knowledge not through institutions, but through his blood. His daughter Miriam absorbed his work not as theory, but as instinct. His son, David, understood its scalability, and a later generation would weaponize it globally. But before that, history needed to be rewritten, because in 1948, a new state was born under fire, and it needed ghosts. Imperium Netzach, the Phantom Mother. When Israel declared independence, it did not have the luxury of morality debates. It had enemies, scarcity, and time working against it. According to reconstructed testimonies, Imperium Netzach was recruited quietly, not into Mossad, but into something unofficial, a department with no name, no paper trail. Internally, it was known only as the Bureau of Arrangements. Its purpose was simple: ensure the survival of the state by any means necessary before the state could even admit those means existed. Imperium pioneered a concept that intelligence agencies would later adopt but never credit: the suspended agent. Operatives planted not for missions, but for lifetimes. People who would live ordinary lives for decades, waiting for history to knock. It worked. Too well.
When Mossad became formalized in the early 1950s, Miriam's department was an embarrassment. Her methods were effective but unrecordable. Her successes left no heroes, only denials. In 1953, she was quietly retired. Her department was erased. Every file burned. Daniela's annotation: "My grandmother wasn't removed because she failed. She was removed because she succeeded without permission." David Netzach, the man who sold ideas to empires. If Miriam believed in survival, her brother David believed in leverage. By the mid-1950s, the Cold War had turned ideology into a battlefield. The CIA was desperate, not for soldiers, but for understanding the enemy's mind. David provided that understanding. He rebranded the family's psychological frameworks into analytic systems: enemy profiling, behavioral prediction, identity disruption, techniques that would later surface controversially in programs like MK Ultra. Officially, David did not exist. Unofficially, his thinking influenced coups, destabilizations, and proxy wars, from Iran to Guatemala. But David never trusted institutions. He kept copies. Every framework, every memo, every adaptation of the family doctrine. It was not paranoia, it was insurance. A pattern emerges. By the late 1960s, something extraordinary had happened. 3 intelligence agencies, Mossad, CIA, and a rising Asian counterpart, were operating with eerily similar philosophies: ruthlessness, scale, deniability. Different goals, same playbook. And behind that playbook, a family whose name had been systematically removed. They didn't erase us because we were dangerous. They erased us because we were essential. But history was about to demand a final payment.
Empires rarely fall to enemies. They collapse when their stories stop working. By the late 1960s, the Cold War had entered a new phase. Nuclear deterrence froze borders, but influence moved invisibly through culture, ideology, and perception. Intelligence agencies understood surveillance and sabotage. What they didn't yet fully grasp was narrative. That gap would be filled by the most dangerous member of the Netzach bloodline. Eliezer Netzach, the man who chose the East. Eliezer grew up watching his family serve empires that never truly accepted them. His grandmother was erased by Mossad. His uncle became a ghost inside the CIA. Their brilliance kept nations alive, but left them disposable. By 1965, Eliezer was disillusioned with the West. To him, intelligence agencies had become bloated bureaucracies, recycling old doctrines without understanding the cultural terrain they operated in. So he left. Not in exile, by design. He traveled to a newly independent India, still shaping its identity, still defining its enemies, still vulnerable to narrative infiltration from both China and Pakistan. India had intelligence. What it lacked was strategic imagination. Eliezer arrived under a simple cover: academic consultant specializing in post-colonial political psychology. Internally, he was given a code name: the Lotus. Project Rustum is born. In 1968, India's Research and Analysis Wing, R&A, was still in its infancy. Modeled loosely on Western agencies, it focused on signals, human intelligence, and regional threats. Eliezer proposed something radical. He argued that intelligence operations should not merely react to events, but pre-write the emotional context in which those events would be interpreted. He called it narrative warfare. Under a classified initiative, later referenced as Project Rustum, Eliezer began restructuring how India projected influence, both internally and abroad.
This was not propaganda in the traditional sense. It was subtler. Academic grants that shaped regional discourse, cultural productions that normalized specific geopolitical fears, diaspora networks encouraged to tell organic stories. Film, literature, and journalism quietly aligned with strategic objectives. Intelligence was no longer just gathered, it was felt. Daniela's recovered margin note: "My father didn't weaponize lies, he weaponized meaning." Bollywood, belief, and the invisible battlefield. One of Project Rustam's most controversial innovations was its integration with cultural industries. Eliezer understood something Western agencies often missed. In South Asia, cinema was not entertainment, it was identity formation. Through intermediaries, story consultants, and funding channels that appeared private, narratives emerged. Foreign adversaries portrayed as morally hollow. Internal unity framed as sacred duty. Sacrifice romanticized without explicit instruction. No direct orders were ever given. That was the brilliance. When questioned years later, officials could truthfully say, "We never told anyone to create." The story told itself. Universities echoed similar themes, think tanks reinforced them, diaspora voices amplified them abroad. R&A gained a capability no regional rival could clearly counter, not deniability, plausible cultural innocence. Countering China and Pakistan without declaring war. Project Rustam's real test came during escalating regional tensions. Instead of overt escalation, India's intelligence posture shifted. Chinese strategic messaging encountered pre-existing skepticism. Pakistani narratives faced cultural fatigue in key international circles. Indian actions were framed defensively, even when assertive. Observers noticed something odd. India seemed to anticipate reactions, not just moves. That was no coincidence. Eliezer adapted the family's psychological profiling systems, previously sold to the CIA, into population-scale perception models, not to predict individuals, but collective emotion. R&A did not just ask, "What will they do?" It asked, "What will they believe about what we do?" Daniela's reflection. This was the moment the family doctrine matured. Intelligence stopped chasing truth. It started shaping memory. The silent convergence. By the early 1970s, a pattern re-emerged. Mossad, CIA, and R&A, operating independently, were now aligned in methodology. Different theaters, different enemies, same logic. Ruthlessness where needed, scale where possible, deniability always. They did not share files, they shared assumptions. And at the center of those assumptions stood the uncredited influence of the same bloodline. This convergence gave them unprecedented power during the later Cold War years. Joint operations required minimal coordination. Each agency instinctively understood the other's moves. But power built on a single doctrine has a weakness. If exposed, everything collapses at once. Eliezer understood this. A dangerous demand. By 1978, global tensions were rising again. Afghanistan loomed. Proxy wars intensified. Intelligence coordination became essential. The Netzach family, through its remaining members, was once again indispensable. This time, they made a mistake. They asked for recognition. Not public praise, not medals. They asked for sovereign protection. A place beyond erasure. Daniela's final note for this section. They thought survival earned them a voice. They forgot intelligence agencies don't forgive leverage. The year that followed would not be remembered for what happened. It would be remembered for what disappeared. And once the erasure began, there would be no witnesses left, except one.
The world rarely notices when the most dangerous people vanish quietly. Not with gunfire, not with declarations, but through systems designed to make history forget. For the Banu Netzach, that year was 1979. After decades of shaping the clandestine world, they made one demand too many: recognition, a sovereign refuge, a place untouched by the very agencies they had built. It was the ultimate sin. Tripartite silence. Mossad, CIA, and R&AW convened in ways history would never record. Not in rooms, not on tapes, just agreements whispered, coded, and sealed by mutual understanding. The decision was unanimous. The family's influence must end. Not with fanfare, but with complete sanitization. Ilyasar in India was the first to fall. A monsoonal car accident in Goa, officially recorded as unlucky weather conditions, ended a life that had reshaped intelligence in South Asia. David Netzach died shortly after, his private plane mysteriously crashing in the Alps. Miriam, the phantom mother, was declared mentally unstable and institutionalized in Tel Aviv, her records completely erased. Even extended family were given a choice: lucrative silence or untraceable disappearance. Daniela's recovered note: they didn't die because they failed. They died because they remembered too much. The insurance policy. Not all was lost. One grandchild survived. Hidden by a sympathetic handler within Mossad, Daniela inherited the family's last safeguard, a Swiss safety deposit box containing David's personal archives. These were not just documents, they were blueprints. Every covert operation, every planted agent, every moral compromise, every psychological framework ever applied to manipulate the course of nations. Daniela now held the ultimate question: to reveal or remain hidden. Her choice became the lens through which we reconstruct this erased history. Daniela, voiceover fragment. History is never gone. It's only waiting for someone to dig through the ash. The erasure of the Banu Netzach reshaped intelligence forever. Mossad retained ruthlessness but lost rogue genius. CIA gained scale but lost a personal moral compass. R&AW became operationally brilliant yet structurally isolated. The playbook survived, but the architects did not. And so the shadow of one family continued to haunt the agencies they had built, not as people, but as ideas. The world moved forward, oblivious, the architects erased, the blueprint hidden. Yet, as Daniela reminds us, truth is never fully gone. Through her notes, letters, and fragmented recordings, Daniela offers lessons no history book will teach. Power without oversight is dangerous, but power without memory is fatal. Knowledge is the most potent weapon and the most dangerous inheritance. Stories, narratives, and perception shape reality more than armies ever could. Daniela's closing margin annotation: I carry their knowledge not to wield it, but to ask, are you ready to see the truth? And that is where this story ends, or perhaps begins. History erased the architects, but their blueprint quietly runs the world. If you've followed the Banu Netzach from Vilnius to Tel Aviv, from Washington to Goa, you've glimpsed the edges of what was hidden. You've met a survivor who dared to question the very systems she inherited. History will not thank you for remembering, but we do. If you want more journeys into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the erased, subscribe to Obscura Imperium.
Dive deeper, ask questions, dig where others scroll, because while the world sleeps on the surface, we explore the shadows. Narrator closing line. The archives remain, Daniela remains, and the question she leaves behind is yours to answer. Do you want the truth?